about reading. As home educators, we have put a lot of emphasis on teaching our children to read, and I want to just challenge your thinking on the whole idea of reading. And we begin by thinking we got to teach our child to read, and that is a great start. But the real thing is teaching our child to love reading. And that's where we're going today. And I want to give some tips and tricks and ideas about teaching your child to love reading. So why is reading so important? Well, there are a lot of statements out there about reading. Reading, it says leaders are readers. Educated people are readers. People who make a difference in this world read. And so we want our children to learn to read because it enlarges them as a person. It exposes them to a world that is not in their immediate environment. And so they become a bigger person. They have greater understanding. We have greater understanding when we read. And so it is an important aspect of becoming an educated person is to learn to read and to learn to love reading and to make it a part of our life. Now, you may say, my child hates to read. How do we get from hating to read to loving to read? Well, there may be even a bigger problem. You may say, I hate to read, and you may not be a reader. And so there are some things that we can talk about to help you become more attuned to reading. And, there are things that are not traditional reading that we need to consider. And if you fall into the camp of saying, I don't really enjoy reading, well, here's a way to read that might be more enjoyable for you. Audiobooks. If you can begin to learn to enjoy the stories by letting someone else read to you, you can get them free at the library, or you can get Audible accounts or different paid resources or subscription resources for audiobooks that you can download and listen to them on your phone while you're doing something else, while you're mowing the yard or doing different things, and begin to enjoy having a story in your head and you're imagining these things. Or maybe it's not even a fiction or a historical fiction or a novel or a storyline. Maybe it is a how-to book. But letting someone talk to you and educate you, that begins to whet the appetite for more information that comes in your thoughts. And so maybe audiobooks is one way to help you begin to love the reading process. Start with something short biographies, short how-to books. How about this? Just picking up magazines. Magazines are reading. And so find something that is of interest to you, whether it's like this one is a mechanics or repair type of magazine. It can be about decorating. It can be about any number of things, golf, sports of any sort. It can be any kind of special interest, whether it's horse or whether it's ecology or different things, gardening. So magazines count as reading, but that is the concept of us taking something that someone else has created and learning from it and growing from it. And so growing as a reader may involve audiobooks. It might involve short little snippet books, pamphlets, magazines, but become a self-educator. And as you become a self-educator, you are going to be able to help your child to do the same and to begin to whet their appetite for learning through books, print material, audio recordings, videos. Is video reading? I don't know, but we can use it like reading. And so those are some ideas to kind of get started on yourself and introducing some ideas to your children. So here's some ideas about the children. First of all, start with something simple. You may not have a small child. Maybe the child that you're needing to work with is a teenager or a preteen, but start at a level just below where they are so that they do not strain at the reading process. Because remember, there's a time to teach reading, the skill of reading, but then there's also this concept of teaching the love of reading. And if you're always struggling to read, you will stop reading. So the things that you want to do to increase their love of reading should be below their current level of reading. So you might start with a 5th grader reading this book, which is really designed, the storyline is for a much younger child. And so, but I'm not saying you necessarily have to go down this low, but start at a level below the current reading level of your child so that they're not straining to do the reading. They're able to actually enjoy the story, enjoy the ideas. And so starting below their reading level and letting it grow with them as their skill level increases. Because their skill will increase the more they read, and the more that they read below their level, they will continue to grow. So simple books. The other thing about this is it's got pictures. We all like pictures, and so get books that have pictures. And so it may be something like this that you're using to learn some academic material. But one thing you notice about this is made by the Usborne Company, and then I want to pause here and say, I may use some proprietary type of material that I show you, but I'm not advertising for them. I'm just showing you good examples. And so if you find things that they do, Usborne does a lot of books with pictures. And so where I talk about pictures, they're going to come up. It's just the way it is. And so you can see this one's about insects, and you open up the book, and what do you see? You don't notice the words. You notice the pictures. But then, because the picture is there, it makes you begin to read the words. And so it helps your child to transition from pictures to words whenever the picture seems larger and then the words are less. And so pictures are very helpful, especially as we're learning the skill of reading. And so we're having to interpret these words, and then we look at the example beside it, and it all begins to start fitting together. And so words that are not only simple, books that are not only simple, but books with pictures. Lots of pictures early on. And so you can picture this in your mind, or imagine it in your mind, that children's books, the children's book section at the library has pictures in it, and the more advanced it is, it gets less and less pictures and more words. And so that, just keep that in mind. And let's focus not so much on the words, but the whole aspect of reading. And it helps an early reader if there are pictures. And so not only simple books, picture books, but also books that might be of interest to the child. And find out what your child is interested in. Our children loved horses. And so we had this series, Billy and Blaze series. He's got a dozen books in this series. And it was all about a boy riding a horse and adventures that they went on. And so we would use these as some of their reading exercise. We would read to them. And in fact, that's one thing that I would encourage you to do. And I want to pause here so I don't forget it is, before your child is proficient in reading, and even after, if you want to change your family and if you want to enrich your relationship with your child, read to them. You read to them. And so it's not just when they're little, but whenever there's times together, you're riding in the car, you're having an opportunity to read a story, something that's of interest to you, read it to them, and begin to formulate the relationship around learning experiences. And so we would read these aloud as parent to our children with us, maybe at bedtime, but they would also read them over again themselves. And they want to reread the same book dozens of times because it becomes easier, and they like the story, just like we would watch a movie over. So what about books like this? All right, so this one might get your attention. I'm going to open up the book. Whoa, look at that. It comes jumping out at you. Do you think a child would look at this? Oh yeah, so you don't have to get a book like this, but if you're having a child that you're having trouble getting interested in reading, you may have to exhort to a book that has all kinds of unique things, and they will stop and look at it. Maybe it's a Where's Waldo book, where there's thousands of people in the picture and they got to find one and they want to search for it. And you begin to familiarize themselves with the picture, and you transition little by little from pictures to words. And so, now, maybe it's an older child and they're going, I'm done with those picture books. Well, but yet you still can't get them to read. Well, maybe it's a child that likes to tinker and he wants to fix things, but you still want him to learn to read and to enjoy reading. How about a Fixit book? And guess what's on the inside? Pictures. Okay? And so you find some type of a repair book or something that they're interested in. Maybe they're interested in auto mechanics. Get an auto mechanic book and have them tinker on things that are in the book. And guess what? They're reading and learning to interpret words and to incorporate them into their lives. And so that helps them to realize the value in reading. And maybe they're not going to sit and read for hours, but that's not the goal. The goal is not to become a professional reader, but to use reading to enrich life. And that helps us to become better and bigger people. Now, another thing, we used this over and over with all of our children, and this is again helping us to teach values, scripture, history, and so again, what do you notice? You don't notice the words. You see the pictures. And it does require reading. They heard the stories over and over. They eventually were the ones who read the stories to the other ones, or they read them to themselves. But the pictures help to bring the words to life. And so reading doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't have to look like a struggle. And so where your child is struggling, make it easier. Because if it's not, if it's beyond a certain level of easiness, they'll stop doing it. That's what we do. Whenever something's too hard for us, we just stop doing it. So but eventually, as you whet their appetite for reading, they may advance to something that has, this is C.S. Lewis, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I was surprised when I opened this one up. This wasn't the one that we read with our kids, but when I opened it up, I was going to say, and you advance to books that don't have pictures, and then the first page I turned to, it had picture on it. So, but you notice that there are more words and less pictures, and it just shows the progression that you lead your child from the images to creating the images from the words. Some children are always going to be less efficient readers. In our 4 children, I have one that reads distinctly less well than the others. It's always a struggle, but he loves to read and learn, but he just can't sustain it for as long as the others. And your children are going to be different, one from another, and so that doesn't measure their intelligence, and but it does help them to grow if they can read. And if reading is a struggle, you can use other options for the reading. Remember the audiobooks, videos. There are ways to get the information, but it is very helpful to read because reading makes it easier. So choosing simple books, picture books, books of interest. One thing is resist the urge. If you're trying to help your child love reading, resist the urge to give them a test. The age-old book report. If they are learning to read to learn to love to read, don't make it a test. In fact, you can turn it around and you can say, after you read it, I want you to ask me questions about what you've learned and see if I know it. They can give you a test. Or just have a conversation about it. So say, what did you find interesting? What was something that surprised you? A conversation about the material. Don't make it a job. We want to have them learn to love reading, and that is not an examination. And so there's a time to test their reading comprehension, and that is the teaching of reading. But don't forget the love of reading. So now, as parents, you got to plan a time for them to read. So that means you got to have some time where there is nothing happening. You can say, okay, this is a quiet time. We're going to take 30 minutes, or you can say whatever the time limit is. I don't want to prescribe that. But it might be just before bed, or it might be right after lunch, or it might be, well, you decide. You're in charge, and say, okay, for the next X amount of time, it's going to be quiet time. Here you choose from your lot of selected reading materials that for this month, and so you kind of help them choose. They choose some, and you choose some. But plan a time that that there would be quietness in their ability to read. And so, what about choosing the good books or quiet? Well, use your resources. The first one is your children's librarian at the public library, and they are familiar with children's literature, and even whether it's elementary, junior high, high school, they would be familiar with good options for those age ranges. And so use the children's librarian just to have them pull things that are of interest, particularly if you want to have them read about airplanes or World War II or whatever it is. They can help you find things that's age appropriate. And then you can look at them and decide, okay, yeah, those look great. And then, so the children's librarian is one option, but there are also resources like books like this. We use this over and over and over again. Gladys Hunt, actually, this isn't the only one. This is the one that we used, but Honey for a Child's Heart. And the first part of the book, she's talking about the value of reading, but the most important part for someone just getting started, as well as the bibliography in the back, where she says, okay, for ages 4 to 8, these are good books that are well written, that are interesting, that children love, and so it helps you to make good selections, because when you walk into the library, it's quite overwhelming. And so making a choice, she helps you to make the choice. And she's got another one that's written for Honey for a Teen's Heart. And so there's the Sarah Mackenzie, I can't think of her thing right now, but at any rate, she has a book list. So there are resources out there to help you make decisions, choosing good books. But getting back to the reading time, it needs to be a tech-free time. If you're reading on your phone, guess what? You get distracted, something pops up, and then you follow the rabbit trail, and before long you're not reading, you're playing a game. So have a reading time, choose good quality books, things that are appropriate, use a reading guide or a resource to help you choose things, and lastly, also remember you can use an audiobook. Your child can read, and my children call it reading, when they're listening to a book while they're riding their bicycle. And so you can have great stories, different things going, and using those types of resources. That's not tech-free reading, that's using technology, but there's a time for audiobooks, and sometimes it's for when you're on a trip in the car and everybody's, quote, reading the same book together as you're driving along. So those are some ideas about reading, and not the how to read, but the love of reading. And so I hope you will learn to love reading, even short snippets. Be a self-educator, and you're teaching your children to be self-educators and them to love reading and the learning process. And learning usually does involve reading. So there it is. I hope you enjoy books in your life and travel around the world with your children in your living room through books. This is